Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me a very, very special guest. I have Jennifer Agnes, and she is our managing director of our US business. But not only that, has a career's worth of experience through the ranks in data. Really pleased to have Jen on the show. Welcome along. Thank you for coming.
I'm so glad to be here, Jason. Thanks for having me back.
As part of, yes, of course, you're back for a second go. This time as part of the Cynozure team, which obviously I'm stoked about and continue to be. Brilliant to have one of the team on the show. We haven't done many of these with the team, so it's brilliant to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about I think a topic very close to your heart, which is data management. Confusing to some people, boring to some people. Super exciting to some people, but important to all organizations. And I'm looking forward to getting into some of that with you. But before I do, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody else? Because obviously I know who you are, but it'd be great to hear a bit about you and your background and where you've been and your career in data. Short version.
Short version, I'll try short. I've been working in for many years, but we're not going to talk about that right now. The my background is actually risk management, you may recall. So I'm not a data person by trade, although in risk management, come to find out, you have to be a data person, and that's really how I got into data way back when I was at GE Capital for many years. Started doing underwriting and analytics and portfolio management, and realized some inconsistencies across how we made decisions. And that's really how I jumped into data, was trying to understand how people were presenting their deals and making sure we were going to make the right investment decisions based on consistent information. Who knew it was a profession back then?
Was it a profession back then?
I don't think it was,
Sort of
actually.
fell into it.
He sort of fell into it and thought it was important. And at GE, of course, we were always about continuous improvement and Six Sigma. So you really had the reins to make those types of changes and decisions to make things better. And so that's been my passion ever since then, is making things better, improving things, and finding out that data management actually is one of my passions, like making sure we understand, control, manage, and process data in a strong, consistent, sustainable way. I learned about data, not only from the GE aspect, because I did run the enterprise warehouse systems for regulatory reporting before I left there. So I was doing a lot of data management there, but I also spent a few years at Credit Suisse as the risk and finance chief data officer, working in the risk organization. So data in that case was in risk.
Okay.
So that was a natural alignment. And then spent a couple of years at an energy management company called Schneider Electric, a great green company that does a lot for sustainable solutions for the energy management sector. And then the rest is history. That's when I met you.
Yeah.
And joined
Glad
and
you
joined
did.
Cynozure.
You missed the important part, that your role at Schneider was the chief data officer. So I do think you've got a unique view on data in a large organization, but just data management in general and how you get the most out of it. So so I was very pleased to bring you back onto the show, talk about this. So let's get into it. Let's get to the heart of one of the big things in the industry that I know we've talked about a few times, which is this whole, what do we call this thing? Do we call it data management? Do we call it data governance? Are they the same thing? Are they different things? Do we care? Should we care? What's your view? What's your view on that?
It's a sort of one of those, is it a red herring? Like, let's not talk about that anymore, is sort of how I'd start to think about it. Having spent a lot of time reading and learning and talking to people, the what we call it will offend somebody, or will drive somebody crazy, or make somebody very excited. So I think the label of that is something we kind of want to move a little bit away from. To me, data management is this very comprehensive view of how we collect, curate, manage, and share data in a practical way across an enterprise. And now, obviously, out as third-party data and new things are coming in, how we start to share that and develop that model. And it's about managing the information assets that we have. We can call it governance. I mean, we're not afraid of calling other things governance, like IT governance or corporate governance or even ESG. Like the governance word floats around, but as soon as we talk data governance, people roll their eyes and go, oh God, this is going to take forever. So there's some negative connotation to that language sometimes, often, and maybe people listening don't have that, but I think many of them do. And I think you're famous for saying, let's not talk about data governance, let's just sort of do data governance, right? The worst thing you can say is talking about it, but really show the value of how that actually just is a set of guide rails to keep you on track as you start to manage your data.
Yeah.
And it's the foundation. Governance is actually the foundation of data management, and it's incorporated for me inside the data management discipline, the broad spectrum of data management.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, I'm with you. It's kind of, in some ways, it's super important because data governance is part of governing data, is part of the collective sort of capability of managing data. But what we call it matters if that word is impactful in negative ways. But the work has to be done. Right. But it's just kind of how it's shaped and framed. I mean, it's important, I guess. The difference is important when you talk about, hiring, when you're talking about, roles and responsibilities of how things get done. I think often the debate happens when people are trying to get people behind the initiative, either to get budget approved or just, resource committed. I think that's when it starts to be the challenge, and people say, we're investing all this money in what, rather than it being a general problem per se. Would you see that? Do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's a good angle to think about it. And I think what's changed, at least in my behaviors and understanding over the last few years, is that, we used to build the pyramid from the bottom up. You get the technology and get the data governance guys in, and then you start cleaning data and you start moving up the food chain so you can optimize some value at the top, predictive analytics and whatnot. I think, and governance has always been in that pyramid of creating the right capabilities to be able to manage your data. It's always been in there, but we used to build it horizontally. And I think what's changing now is we have to build those capabilities sort of vertically to fill out that pyramid.
In slices,
so that over time it sort of eventually fans out and fills up the whole pyramid. You can see what I'm doing in my hand, right? So you start with a use case. It might not cover the full stack. It might cover the first 3 tiers because you've got some technology, you've got some governance, you've got some tooling, you've got some DQ, and you solve some problems on the DQ space because a report is wrong, or you've got a regulatory issue, or you've delivered product to the wrong address, or whatever situation or business case or operational problem you encounter. You start solving those problems. And when you hear those business problems, ultimately what you try to root cause is the source of that a data problem. And then you go down the pyramid and you say, well, do I have the right flows? Do I have the right definitions? Do I have the right content? Do I have the right timing? Do I have the right access? Do I have, and all these questions, and you start looking at the root cause of that, and come to find out a lot of it is a data problem, and you start solving them, I would say, vertically instead of horizontally. So you go for budget for the product, for what you're trying to solve, not for the horizontal, the horizontal bar within that lower stack of the pyramid, which is often hard to prove the value of that or quantify the value, unless you are a highly regulated institution and you're going to be hit with a charge or some other risk parameter.
Yeah, well, I think in that instance, you're the problem you're solving or the use case you're solving is regulatory assurance, making sure you're covering the bases that you need to cover, so that the problem is not being fined, not being sent to prison. That's the use case. So I kind of, it stops being a horizontal at that point, I think. But I think the issue is where you build a capability around data management and or data governance. You put the tools in place, the controls in place, with no real clarity over what the end point, what the value is, what the benefit is, what you're going to improve within the organization, other than just having good data governance, which if you're in data you might get, but if you're not in data, that just maybe feels like an expensive or a cost, at least, to the business.
Yep. No, I agree. And on the regulatory side, even though we know we have to do it to survive, and it's a great use case, and you learn a lot by doing it, because I spent a lot of years doing that type of work, the ROI just doesn't come back at you, right?
Yeah.
That's where when you're talking to finance, it's like, how am I going to either recover my money? How is this going to improve me for the future? What I would say is, had we done it all 15 years ago,
Yeah.
we'd probably be
Wouldn't be a
reaping a
problem.
lot of benefit from
Yeah.
it today. But we still, it was a slow slog. It's not easy, and it wasn't easy, to do data governance, CDE by CDE, right? That's critical data elements, and figuring out which one is the most important and who owns it and where is it at source and is it good, is it bad, how does it change the process, and doing lineage. Very, very, very manual tasks in the past.
Yeah.
And so that costs a lot of money too, just to figure it out, right? And comply. So there's a big cost to complying with some of those regulatory requirements. And I think there's ways to do it faster probably now. And I think that's where, we've leapfrogged a bit, and can take advantage. And I'm no expert at it, starting to learn about what these tools and technologies are and processes we can start to use in the future, but to leapfrog those manual processes and really look at how to automate some of this data governance type activities, whether it's lineage, cataloging, that kind of thing. There's a lot of things out there today, a lot of tools that we see every day, seminars and conferences about what these tools can do. I can't profess to know any of those tools profoundly at this point. I know some of the names. Part of the work, that I'm learning about is really trying to understand the value, if they're all the same or if they're all different. What are the nuances between some of those tools? What's right for the customer too, right? Because what we've talked about, I think, in the past is data governance is not a one size fits all thing.
Yeah.
Some companies don't need a whole lot of governance around their data because it's all automated and created, systematically, their data.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a better, they don't have a lot of issues, or they're too small to start at a heavy hand. And I think what's important is understanding and sort of right sizing the governance activity of it. But all that is really, again, around the guardrails, because the management aspect is actually then the flows and making sure it gets to who it needs to get to at the right time, at the right pace, so that they can actually make some insights or decisions using that information.
Yeah. I mean, the technology landscape's interesting in this space, in that a lot of the tooling is relatively new, and there's been some consolidation in the tech space. But as you say, it's data management, data governance is a broad topic, and each technology deals with a different part of data management, data governance. Some focus on quality, some focus on cataloging, some focus on data ingestion, some focus on the lineage. Obviously, some package that up and can do a few of them.
Yeah.
But what's really important is knowing which of the problems you're trying to solve and how big they are in relative terms to each other, so that you know which technology or which technologies to invest in, and how you best knit them together. But before technology and Cynozure, we always talk about this. We've got to know what problem we're trying to solve before investing in technology, not buying technology and trying to find problems to solve. And it, I guess, that coupled with some level of confusion in this space about what it is, who owns it, why we need to care. How do we start to, I suppose, get people to care? How do you see organizations best really getting in front of this and making it an impactful and an important element to successful business, I suppose? What's the sort of the best way of doing that? Because we've just touched on, maybe not talking about data governance all the time, but how do we sort of start to bring it to life?
I think the best way to do that, the newest way to do it, we used to talk about, let's just do data governance, is to talk about the business problems at hand. So understanding, talking to your customer support centers, talking to your sales teams or your risk teams, and asking them what problems are they seeing. Your logistics teams, are you having problems? They're having problems because the customer complaints, metrics on that. They're always measuring how many and how fast you can resolve them, whether you're a digital company or a physical delivery company, that everybody's got a customer service center, right? And if you start to, comb through some of those problems, you'll just see repeat problems. And I'm giving you a very practical answer because this is how I do it. Like you have to go into the logs and look at what people are saying and decipher what they're saying, because a lot of that is inconsistent, another data problem, but at least there's some consistency. Like you can learn from that log and group common problems together and go, that smells like it might be something that's a problem we want to solve. Let's put that together. How big is that problem? Try to put a cost or a risk to it. And then look to see if it's really a root cause in data. And so some of those problems I alluded to it earlier is, you delivered, the client thought they ordered 5 pallets, but they really got 5 boxes or 5 units, and it could have gone to an address at the headquarters versus the 60 different subsidiary delivery locations. And I did listen to your podcast the other day, of course, about your bike incident for your son and the troubles you've had. So if anybody hasn't listened to that, they should listen to a really true and hard example of, logistics problems and lack of consistency and measuring data, addresses. You deliver something to the wrong address, you lose your customer, you lose your credibility, you lose money because they didn't pay you then for that, right? There's a whole thing. And those are business problems that have a root cause because you didn't have the right authoritative source for your data. You didn't know what the master was. And those kind of quantified problems, you can get the ear of people that care, that actually have the budget and will approve your budget, because you're going to impact, one of probably the 3 most important things Zora is looking at is increasing income, reducing costs, or managing risk.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the approach I would take. I mean, it seems very logical and programmatic to me. And you can then start to build the solution to solve that problem in that vertical horizontal, in that vertical pyramid we just talked about in terms of how to solve the problems.
So work back from a real genuine problem that probably impacts the customer, and that could be external, that could be an internal customer, but work back from the real challenge that we've got to then back to the data that is creating or part of that problem, to then know what to fix, and then know what technology to buy, know what data in integration we might need, what to fix, rather than starting with a bunch of data problems that we think we have and not knowing what they're connected to.
Right, exactly. You sort of flip it on its head a bit, and people will talk. Those are stories you can tell. Like the people remember those stories more than I've got a data problem. It's stories about business problems that you're trying to solve that tie to your business strategy, and your OKRs and the way you're trying to grow your business. Those stories stick with more than just the technology or data teams. They stick with the business people.
Here's a thought. So we in data management, we talk a lot about data, and we've just talked about business problems. It isn't really data created through business process, and data is almost a exhaust fume, a byproduct of that business process.
Yep.
So we don't really, data industry doesn't really talk about business process as much as it could or should, given how integrated it is with data. It drives how systems are used. It drives the handoffs between different teams, different organizations within, ecosystem of businesses. As I say, it's the thing that creates the data. So when is this really about business process management rather than data management?
I totally love that question. Coming from I'm a process person, right? Risk management, GE process. I mentioned it earlier. I'm all about the process.
Yeah.
So for me, it's you can call it an exhaust. I was an interim CDO for a company whose CEO called it exhaust, and we wanted to use that exhaust. So that's an interesting term that you've chosen to use. It's a byproduct or whatever, but it really shouldn't be, right? It should be the intentional creation from your business process of something you will use and consume, repeatedly, a reusability factor in that, so that you can actually manage your process better and deliver the product or value you're trying to deliver from that process.
Yeah.
So you see that, the first thing you look at is to me, the business. It's not about, so I'll give you another story from my financial services days. Lineage, a topic people.
What's lineage? What just define lineage for us?
data lineage, like the traceability, the physical traceability from potentially like a key risk measure back to the source.
Cool.
Very manual process back then, very time consuming. There are technologies today that help you do that a little bit faster, I think. But doing the technical lineage of anything, my firm belief is it's wrong as soon as you're done with it. Because the next day, the technology team changed a feed or added an attribute or did something different. And therefore, you have to go and adjust the documentation, which nobody ever did back then, right? And to document the change. So to me, that became a very costly exercise that never ended. Mm-hmm. And what I was promoting at the time, and still promote, I would say, if I'm back in the lineage conversation again, is talking about the business process lineage, just to get the lineage word in there, but talking about where is the data coming from? What process is it emanating from? Where did it start? Who owns that process? So that instead of trying to boil the ocean and track the lineage from a key report back to its source in a physical fashion with 100 technology specialists opening files and looking at code, you basically had, if you found a data issue, you had a hotline to the business process owner, who then might have known the system and the technology, and you could sort of be very strategic, or maybe it's very tactical. You go right to the hotspot of where the risk was, and then go vertical and deep into where that risk was and look left and right and see where the flows might be broken, versus boiling the ocean and trying to write everything down and knowing that, 3 days from now, somebody had a change request and the flows changed. Yeah. Right. And that is a really manual.
That may or may not be because a business process changed.
It may or may not be. Yeah. Because there wasn't a lot of coordination in how things are coded or documented back then, and still probably aren't in many of these companies that have legacy systems. So I'm a big fan of business process understanding and knowing who's in charge of the processes. That's why, enterprise architecture is so important. Right? Understanding what are all the capabilities and what's happening in your enterprise. What are the processes that are part of that architecture? What data comes out of those processes? Who manages those processes? And it goes from there. So it's an ecosystem of things. It's not just the data team or the tech team or the marketing team or the sales team or the risk team, HR. It has to be seen in this ecosystem of the flows of the enterprise architecture and the business processes that are run. And then the data comes out of all of that. So I'm a huge process fan. Sorry, I hope you didn't get me started on something. No, there, you touched a raw nerve.
No, well, do you know what? While you're talking, it's also made me reflect on the term exhaust fume, and I want to kind of correct myself, I guess, because that makes it feel like so in some ways it is the byproduct. Exhaust fume makes it feel like dirty and just pops out the end, which isn't quite right. But there's some real value, right? That this is not exhaust fume. This is I don't know if this analogy works, but it's sort of it's feeding back on itself, right? It's created through a business process, so it's a byproduct of the process that happens, and a byproduct of someone using a website or a system or taking an action. But that data is juice. It's juice to then drive the organization, the engine forward again by harnessing. We haven't really talked about sort of using that data that's created through this process and through good data management to then be able to create some brilliant insight, some models, make some predictions, make a better experience for customers. So it helps manage the operations of the business. We need that because that keeps us going forward. That limits problems, and we talked about brand and customer reputation, all that good stuff. But equally, there's some really important and valuable opportunity once we've got that data right to then get some really interesting insight, which then helps us to give firepower to the rest of the business. So it's sort of not for the sake of running the business only, it's also for the sake of insight, which helps you improve the business more holistically.
And that to me, the language I would use around that is sort of data by design, right? So it's not that end byproduct. It happens to be an output.
Yes.
But if you design your processes right, especially companies that have the luxury of starting from scratch or starting new, thinking about what information you need to make decisions in the future is how you need to design your processes and your collection mechanisms and your curation mechanisms and all of that stuff throughout that whole process. So it's designing for data, not not realizing 30 years after you've been operating,
you
I should
needed
have been
something.
collecting that. Yeah.
Well, and not even 30 years, sometimes at the end of a new system implementation, it's like, we forgot about
Exactly.
data, and it's like, we need to report on,
I forgot about data. Oh
yeah.
my God. Can you imagine?
Who would do such a thing? Not in our day. Not in our
And
day.
the other thing I would say about that, designing for data, but designing for reusability, like
Yeah.
making sure, and that this comes down to conversations, in any good structured data management program and processes is, knowing what information you have, how it's being used, who's using it, how fresh is it, what quality is it, the catalog conversation, which is a really important way to enhance, let's say, data literacy. I don't like using that term because it's a very meaningful thing to a lot of people. It helps your company understand the information they have at their fingertips if they're able to look at it in a business context. And that's really what metadata does, and what the catalog does for you is help you understand if so and so in finance is using that for this type of reporting, that's definitely not what I need for this type of analysis that I'm doing, or vice versa. That's exactly what I need. Let me just reuse this information so that I'm not, burning the candles at all ends trying to recreate data which is already in existence. I think I told you this story once before. Maybe I'm repeating myself. You tell me. But way back before before it was kind of cool to be in data, I can remember at GE creating a store. I called it a data store. I didn't know that was a technical term. I was like, we could have a boutique store, or we could have like another store that was like there. You knew when the product was available. Every Thursday at 2, there'd be a product. If you needed it, you could pull it down and use it. And I created these 2 stores concept because my team was buried. They were always getting requests from the business, or somebody was doing their own queries and taking down the where. I mean, remember those days when they would shut down? Everybody like, who's doing this giant query? They didn't know. So I put in place this process of, telling people not to run their own queries, but also we promise if you don't do that, we will give you the data that you needed. And it might be a bigger data set than you need. You can carve it down. But if you have a specific request, a boutique request, you can put that log over here and we'll honor that too. We'll do that in a certain SLA. So, reusing the information you have is like a zero marginal cost thing that we really have to get at, and deliver, because we keep recreating things, a new MART, a new this, a new that. But the catalog can actually help you, if you do it right, and it takes time to put that in place, help you and the company understand what's there, how you can reuse it, how often it's used. It's a really good feature of any good data management, or capability, I would say, of any good data management program.
I think reusability is important across business anyway, isn't it? It removes duplication, that removes cost. I think that's just sensible, and data and data management, really is just the same. And I think if you mentioned literacy there, if we want to create a more literate organization, I think people need to understand this is the stuff they need to be literate on, as well as the most important, which is how best to use data to make its decisions. That's sort of true literacy. But without understanding, how to better manage data, and without people caring about the impact that poor data can have on basically the business performance, I don't think we can move. I don't think we can move forward with good data literacy. But I think the danger is that people go away and say, well, let's go and sort all our data management, data governance problems before we try and do anything else. But I sort of almost take us back to the start. That's not the gig here, is it? That we've got to think problem by problem, business problem by business problem, not data problem by data problem, and focus on ensuring that everything we do and every penny we invest is in ensuring that we're helping to move the ship faster, or get to our outcome better or more quickly, rather than data for data's sake.
Agree.
Brilliant. Well, I think there's so much to this topic, and I know we've just scratched the surface, but it feels like a good place to kind of draw it to a close for now. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel really weird just talking to you as part of a podcast rather than just a normal call that we have, but it's been great to have you on the show. I'm sure everyone will get loads of value from that, and anything that you say in this space is baked in not just theory but practice. So I'm sure everyone will get behind what you're saying here. So thanks very much for coming on the show, Jen.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Always fun. See you.
No worries. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you again soon.